The crew were starving. No food, no water. Just sun, salt, and death closing in. What they found on that forgotten island, though, was worse than any storm, and it changed them forever. But before we begin, if you're drawn to stories with mystery, meaning, and the otherworldly, to legends passed down as truth, then this is the channel for you. I share new stories each week, drawn from folklore, forgotten history, and strange events that linger at the edge of belief. So tap the like button and subscribe with all notifications on so you never miss what's next. Let's begin. The sea had been cruel to this crew, so for weeks they just drifted aimlessly as a storm had blown them off course. All of their supplies were spoiled, and what little water they had left turned black from mold. The crew was from West Africa. Now, they were returning home from a trading voyage in China. So they had spices, they had silks, they had porcelain, but at this point, all of that was totally useless as they were on the brink of starvation. The night before, one man had died in his sleep. All of them were getting kind of crazy. They couldn't really think straight. Their lips were cracked and their hands were shaking a lot. You could hear the youngest crying in the back of the boat. Now, the boat itself, too, it seemed to just kind of groan under the weight of their misery. This once proud, once swift ship now sagged low in the waters. Its sails were all tattered. The ropes were crusted in salt, and they were all frayed at the end. The men themselves were just burning under the sun. Their skin was blistered and raw. Most of them would just stare blankly into the horizon, either fading off into nothingness or trying to look to see if they could find a boat or an island. Now, none of them really said much anymore. There wasn't anything to say. This one particular day, as they were sailing along, one of the sailors saw something in the distance. At first, he thought it was maybe a whale, but then he yelled out, "Land!" There was this low, pale island. Now, on that island, they saw no huts, no sails, no sign of civilization. It was just white rock and these wind-gnarled trees. So they rowed until their arms just felt like they were on fire. They all got off the boat, and the men just collapsed on the shore. Now, there was nothing around them. There were a bunch of rocks in the center of the island, and everything was just very quiet. Then they saw the bones. Not human bones, not bones from beast. They saw these massive ribs that were kind of weathered and pale, and each of them was the length of a wagon axle. There was a skull that was about the size of a barrel, and so it was broader and heavier than any humans, and it was buried halfway into the sand. One of the sailors whispered, "Giants." They wanted to leave, but they knew if they left, if they returned to the ship, they would most likely die at sea. They had no food, no water, and nothing was waiting for them in the ocean. So they really had no choice. They had to continue forward and explore the island. Now, fortunately for them, at the base of this pile of rocks, there was a spring, and they found clear, cold water running from that. They drank until their bellies were totally full. They cried while they were drinking. They couldn't believe it. Their thirst had literally been quenched. But then, soon after, the hunger set in. Now, they set off again to look for food, and up at the top of the rocks, they see this dome-like structure. So they think, oh, maybe civilization. Let's go. Let's see what's up there. So they climb up the rocks, and their initial awe had turned to unease. This dome was not a man-made structure. It was a giant egg in a massive nest. Now, this nest was in this depression in a rock, and it had these giant branches thicker than a man's arm. As they got closer, they noticed it wasn't one egg, but it was several eggs all lined up neatly. They were smooth, pale, and immense. The egg nearest to them had already begun to crack on the top. One of the men went up, put his hand on the egg, and said, "It's warm." At that point, some of the men said, "Okay, that's it. We need to leave. This is crazy." And the others said, "What do you mean this is crazy? This is a gift from God. We must eat this egg." Then the egg twitched. Something inside it shifted. Now, one of the men raised his axe. The others then immediately followed, and they all just started hacking at this egg. Now, it was almost like just chopping into hard wood. It was really hard to get it open, but finally they broke through, and inside there was a baby bird. Now, this bird was huge, but it was a baby. You could still see some of the yolk on top of it. It had soft feathers. Its eyes were shut, and it let out this breath and then just kind of went still. And one of the men said, "This is meat. We can eat this." So they took out their knives and their swords and they started to carve the meat up. They would take whatever pieces they could fit in their bags, whatever chunks they could carry over their shoulder. And at the end, the captain pulled out a massive feather and took it with him. Now, as they reached the boat, the sun had just touched the water, and they pushed off. Now, they hadn't sailed more than 100 strokes when the wind just kind of died. And at that point, a shadow came. It stretched over the waves like a storm cloud passing by. And then they heard something. It was part scream, part thunder. This was no storm cloud. It was the mother. Its wings spanned 30 meters. Feathers were dark with streaks of silver and bronze, and each was as long as a ship's sail. Its beak was hooked and iron-colored, and its eyes were like molten gold set deep beneath its heavy brow. Its talons were as long as swords, gleaming in the sun, filled with rage. This was no ordinary bird. This was the legendary roc, a creature said to nest in the highest mountains, capable of carrying elephants in its grip. Now, it circled once above them and then started to descend. And then they saw it. In its talons, it was carrying a massive boulder. The crew shouted. The stone struck the sea behind the boat, spraying foam high into the air, and the boat rocked violently. Then the roc dove. Its talons ripped into the hole. One sailor was plucked in the air and thrown, screaming as he landed in the sea. Another was caught mid-run. His chest was crushed with this sickening crack. They fought back with torches, knives, spears, whatever they could find. But it was kind of like trying to fight a storm cloud. One man was grabbed by the leg, lifted, and torn in two. Another took a lit torch and flung it at the roc's feathers. But it did nothing. Only a handful of men remained. Then, just as the roc turned for its final strike, they heard it. Shouting from the island. The roc paused mid-air. They all turned their heads to look at the island. Giants. Not bones, living. They had all climbed the rocks and headed straight for the nest, encircling it. The roc let out a deafening cry, turned, and headed straight for the nest. The crew scrambled. Some grabbed oars, others hoisted sails, and they got out as fast as they could and didn't look back. They kept going until the island was just a memory. That night, on calm waters, they lit a fire and cooked the roc's meat. It had this strange sizzle to it, and the scent was this rich kind of roasted chestnuts and cinnamon smell. They ate it slowly, and then they entered into this deep sleep. In the morning, when they rose, everything was different. Their wounds were healed. One man, who had gone blind in one eye, could see. Another, once bent by age, stood tall and straight. Their strength had grown. Their senses sharpened. They heard birds from miles away, but it was more than that. They understood things that they couldn't explain. The wind, the currents, the thoughts of beasts, the instincts of birds. They did not become gods. something wilder, part man, part something else. They sailed home in silence. This tale comes from 1001 Nights and was first told by Abd al-Rahman, a man of West Africa who had traveled so often to China that he learned to speak fluent Chinese and was respected by merchants across Asia. He returned home with a single feather from the rock, but no one believed it was real. They laughed, calling it a sailor's tale. Yet Abd never wavered. He simply said, "I saw it, and I survived." Some say it was fantasy. Others say it was a warning. And some say, if you touch that feather, you can feel the wind move before it rises. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if this story stirred something in you, share it with someone who still believes that legend is just history waiting to be proven. I'll see you in the next story.